Well, hello and welcome to everyone. Most of you have already been subjected to what I'm now referring to as the creepy greeting. You know, hello, I'm David. I chair these events, and clearly some people are finding that threatening, but I'm sticking with it. I'm hoping that it'll feel warm and welcoming for others. It's brilliant to be back, courtesy of our sponsors, Creative Scotland, Education Scotland, to provide the funding eventually, and that's a good thing. We were just saying earlier on that we're in a really interesting time, aren't we, because of the industrial action and everything, and I'm hoping that I might be able to get some weight behind the campaign, because Shirley Ann Somerville is a former pupil of mine, and I wonder if I might try that line of, remember that hire you got? Now's the time for payback. But aside from that, it's just brilliant to be through COVID lockdown and everything else and back with live events, and to see a bit of momentum picking up around them. And particularly brilliant today to be picking up with Hywel Roberts, who is a friend not only of mine but a friend of Creative Conversations, and we've had him so many times that if he doesn't turn up, I just simply do an impersonation, and it seems to work reasonably fine. You all right? So it seems to work grand, we just get that going. Yeah. So friend of the Conversations, friend of mine, he's a brilliant colleague and he's a legend. And Hywel, of course, markets himself as a travelling teacher, and he genuinely is. I've worked with him both presentations but also in classes. I've seen him teach, I've seen him work with kids and young people, and he's a masterclass in credibility. Unlike a lot of other people, he can do it, he can deliver. And he's got a book, so clearly since the last time I saw him he's learnt to write, which proves that the literacy strategy has not been time wasted really, which I think is good to know. And the book's called Botheredness, so clearly the opening question, why? Tell us, what is botheredness?
Thanks, David, and I must say it's just brilliant to be invited back here. The creative conversation is an important part of what I do, really. It's the stuff that I do with teachers and with children all the time, having these learning conversations. And when I'm in class, when I'm in schools, I like to get into class. I was in class yesterday. I was taken to the cleaners by a group of early years children. They really ran me ragged. But we had a good session, and the teachers are in watching me do my stuff with them. And we then debrief it, we then talk about what we've done. And it's all about this. It is all about how do we, as teachers, if you like, couch the knowledge. We've got knowledge that could be a list of cold facts. How do we then warm it all up? With a bit of, if you like, humanity. That's sometimes not enough to say that to some teachers, because they'll just say, well, that sounds very nice, but it's a bit airy-fairy, right? So
we'll do subtitles.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Are you all right with me? Are you all right with me? Do you want me to stand up?
Struggling with the concept of airy-fairy.
Airy-fairy. And I was saying to some teachers yesterday, these kids here, they are charming. They have got enough fun. The school where I was at, they've got enough fun, these kids, without someone just saying, right, we need to do this now. We need to do this, and this, and we've got to do it by lunchtime. So what we've got to do is, if you like, as teachers, and this is what I'm laying out in the book, is say, right, how do we couch this together? How do we make this matter? That's it. How do we make it matter? And I suppose, if you like, what one way of doing it, the way I like to talk about it, and if you've heard me speak before, you'll have heard this before, I like to put it into a story or a narrative. If you think story is a bit babyish, then it's a narrative or a context. Yeah? But it's actually just a story. And all stories ever are made of three elements: people in a place with a problem, a dilemma, something that needs sorting out. So I'm thinking about these early years kids yesterday, and they'd done a book called, you might not know this book, David, it's called Bee Goo. Okay, it's about it's earlier, so it's about a yellow alien. It's like E.T., right? And they've read that book. So now I'm a man who's got his house. I've drawn a picture of my house, drawn a picture of my tree, drawn a picture of my shed, and my garden's a mess. So I've asked the children to help me tidy my garden, and they're happy to do so. They're really happy to do so. And all I've asked is, if you're going to help me do this, what jobs need doing and what tools do you need? And they start to tell me. And if you like, that's me just using a context, help me tidy the garden. That's me using a context to bring the kids in. We're actually going to be talking about plants, because that's their knowledge, plants. But they're going to tell me all they know when they're helping me do my garden. And then towards the end of the lesson, there was a noise coming. I'm pointing over there, right? Thanks for looking. But I'm pointing over there because that's what I do with the kids. It's like there's a shed over there, and there's a noise coming from the shed, and the kids are looking. I said, can we just go and check what's in the shed? And there's a little boy called PJ, right? It's not short for pyjama, but it's called PJ. And he's very annoyed about what might be in the shed. So I let him take me to the area of the classroom where I pointed, and I said, can you look in the shed? And he said, I will. So he went, he just did this, and then he looked at me and he said, it's a mess in there as well. And so we need to tidy. And then in there we found this alien hiding, which they had knew about because they'd read the story a couple of weeks ago, and now they were really excited because Bee Goo was back. Does that make sense? Now, I know some of you are secondary teachers and you're thinking, this is really nice, but not very helpful. Right? Now, in terms of context, with Key Stage 3, for example, recently, we had got the class, and let's say, which is a nice welcome into a story, let's say we're standing on a beach at night, and we're avoiding the lights that are being cast from the hotel. All right, this is year 9. We're avoiding. It's
S3.
Say again.
S3.
S3. And
Simultaneous translation, Hal. This is great.
I wish you would shout out like that. That scares me like that. The hotel lights, we're avoiding them because we're waiting for someone to come and pick us up. Because we've paid this person to pick us up. And this person has promised us that they're going to take us somewhere safe. Because we're just passing through here. So the story doesn't have to be, the context doesn't have to be, it needs to be age appropriate. And that's why I've put stories there. And all stories have got people, place and problem. And if you like, if you imagine EastEnders where there weren't any problems, you know, be like, can you mind my stall? Yeah? You know, so as a teacher, we've got our knowledge, but we're also thinking about how do we weave that knowledge then into this context. So botheredness is building that, is getting that affected, getting that affectus, that compassion from kids, placing kids in a position, if you like, in an imagined position that will help them, if you like, understand the knowledge in context.
There's a really interesting
I'll sit down now.
There's a really interesting piece in the book, I think, and forgive me because I get confused between what's in the book and stuff that we've talked about. Yeah. But there's a brilliant example that you use around teaching Macbeth, which I think is a really good example of a kind of an older context, if you like.
Yeah. And
that's about not quite through a narrative, but it's a different way in to Botheredness. So do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, and that, thanks for bringing that up, David, because that takes us to stance, really. And I'm going to stand. Is it all right if I stand up? I want to see the whites of your eyes. The stance is just that position that we take as teachers. That sometimes it's totally appropriate that we're at the front of the class telling kids stuff, directly instructing, which is what, that's the if you like, the pedagogical fad in England is very much directly instructing and nothing else. And I think what we have as teachers is I think good teaching is being able to say, well, I've got lots of different choices about how I teach this stuff. And in fact, some of the kids in my class need more protection than me just giving them the facts or giving them a worksheet. Actually, what they need is a bit of this protection. So the example that you were alluding to there, David, is it was in a pupil referral unit, so a behaviour setting, SEMH setting in England, and in Barnsley, in South Yorkshire. And on the curriculum it says, you know, we've got a curriculum that's published, but that's sometimes a bit different to what's lived, isn't it? You know, and what's actually happening in the room, particularly in a special setting, where we have to, our stance is shifting all the time. And the kids are being required to study a particular text because we've said that's what we're going to do. So I talked to the kids about Lance Armstrong. Do you remember the cyclist? Some of you might have to Google him because you look quite young. But he's a good example of someone who I think, I mean, I'm not an expert on him, but I think he was like, he did lots of good stuff, lots of fundraising, for millions of dollars in fundraising for cancer charities, but also was a ridiculous dope cheat in sport and influential amongst his peers. So I told the kids about him, and funnily enough, they were all boys in this class, funnily enough, they were thinking, well, he sounds mint. You know, who is this guy? So he sounds, you know, so they wanted to find out about him, so they did. And then we also looked at another character, a real person called Sepp Blatter, who used to run FIFA, who allegedly,
we are online.
Yes, allegedly, you know, there were some problems with the finances. Something he was connected with some would say some rather dubious practice and corrupt practice. Now I'm telling this to the kids, and they're all like, "This is great." So let's go and find out about these flawed men. Let's go and find out about these flawed men. Let's go and find out about them. So we researched them. They're telling me about them, and then it turned out there was a film on Netflix called The Programme, all about Lance Armstrong. So they're all like buzzing about this, and we were looking at all this, and eventually we were writing lists of we were writing descriptions of what these men must be like, what sort of people were they, and then we started to look at Macbeth, and that was, if you like, the protecting in. So we've learned about those two men. Here's this other fella. Let me tell you about him. And the kids are like, all right, is he a nightmare as well? Well, he has a bit of a nightmare, yes. Let's unpick that. So I think, if you like, something to think about is, how do we, as teachers, in whatever subject we're teaching, or whatever curriculum area, how do we ensure that the kids feel like they belong in with that work that we want them to do? I taught drama, and I knew secondary drama, I knew outside my room there'd be 6 kids at the front of the class who were ready to run in and go, "Oh, Oklahoma!" You know, they'd come straight in and want to absolutely be performing. And then there'd be like 20 kids who'd be going, "Yeah, it's drama," and then it's break. You know, and then there'd be 5 kids at the back whose stomachs were churning and whose legs were shaking because they were that worried about the lesson, because they saw drama as humiliating, in spite of anything that I would do. So then they'd kick off. So then there'd be behaviour issues and stuff like that. And it's my job, I felt, was how do I protect them into it? And I'd do that as an English teacher, and other subjects that I'd teach. So that stance. Yeah.
There's something really interesting as well that you talked about there, Hywel, and that's about giving young people recognition and making them feel safe and a sense of belonging. And one of the other things I've heard you talk about, and you talk about it in the book as well, is the context that we choose for learning and some of the choices that we make around curriculum. And given that you've recently had a selfie with Matthew Modine, in the recent production of To Kill a Mockingbird. For anyone who hasn't seen it, this selfie is indeed available both on Twitter and on Facebook.
Yeah,
it's
available
so
everywhere.
creepy, I feel I could have been in it. But anyway, given that you recently had that, tell us a bit about that Kes To Kill a Mockingbird divide.
Yeah, I mean, I will do. My background is teaching in South Yorkshire in Barnsley, which was when I went there in the 90s. It's very white working class, and it's got the hangover. It had the hangover, I should say, of the closure of the coal mines during the strikes. Even in the 90s, the strikes were in the 80s, obviously, but there was still this hangover. There was a lack of investment, a lack of aspiration, a lack of hope, almost. And I remember going in there as a young teacher in my suit and stuff, and I remember going into a classroom, and there weren't behaviour problems necessarily. There was optimism problems, you know. And when I'd walk in as a bloke in a shirt and tie, the kids would look at the shoes. You know, it was really telling. And I'd been told, oh, it's rough, you know, it's hard there, you know, you've got to watch yourself there and things like that. And it wasn't like that at all. And I found actually teaching the kids in that town, it was a big part of my professional upbringing. And I was an English teacher. I taught English, drama, and due to a timetabling error, German. That was a bit of a shock because I couldn't speak it. But it was in those old days where there was always that deputy head that you never saw him out of their office. They had that big wall full of pins and diagrams making the timetable. And I went to see our deputy head. He was called Graham, still is. And I went to see him. He had a scar down his face, and rumour was that he'd killed a man. We don't know which man, just that was the rumour amongst the staff and the kids. So going to see him to tell him he's made a mistake on the timetable was a bit of a scary thing. But I went to see him, I said, Graham, I think there's been a mistake on my timetable. And he turned around and looked at me with his good eye. He was like a Bond villain. I turned around, he was actually a very lovely man, but he turned around and he went, there are no mistakes. And I said, but I'm teaching German and I don't speak it. And I think that's a mistake, you know. And he said, Hywel, teaching is teaching. And he just turned around. And I'm like, and I don't know, for some reason I found it really moving. And do you know when you're young and that, my eyes are filling up and I'm going up the corridor going, teaching is teaching. You know, teaching is teaching. And I soon, you know, about 3 weeks in with year 7 German, first year German, I realised that teaching isn't teaching. It was a total nightmare. One of my kids said, sir, you don't know what you're on about, do you? And I said, yeah. Yeah. And I ended up with this bottom set English class, and it was joyful, and I worked with them, and they were all right, and we were left alone because I was in a prefab building. You know, one of those is that what they call them? Temporary building. Is that what they call them? Like made of sponge, loads of asbestos. You know, we're all poorly. But and the kids would come in, and they'd often come in all right, and there was one lad in there who would always set the lesson objective, which was, this better be good. And so I'd take that on and I'd be like, well, I hope it is, Troy, I hope it is, let's hope so. And I taught them Kestrel for a Knave by Barry Hines, who was a teacher in Barnsley and Sheffield. You know, he was before my time a local teacher, and he happened to score this big hit with this book. And so to teach that book to those kids was a complete joy and really straightforward because it was about them. And they loved it because their dad had studied it, you know, their uncles had studied it. Troy, this kid I'm thinking about now, his auntie was in the film. And he was so thrilled that we were studying it. He went to Tesco, and shoplifted 4 copies of the DVD, brought them up, and he gifted me one of them. I was like, I'm not sure I can take that. I don't know what. I was really conflicted, and I probably should have done lots of things, but I've still got it. I've still got it. So he was really keen to watch the film. So in terms of motivation, those kids were invested because they saw themselves in the book, and they were pretty much looking forward to me doing the swearing. I don't know if you know the book, but there's a bit of swearing in it and stuff. And they were really enjoying it. And it was all, if we were a football team, it was like we were all at home. It was like we were playing at home. You know, it was an easy book to teach. One day they came in, they were all being horrible to each other. Something had happened. They were all, they were using awful language with each other. They were using racist language, and I'm like, where has this come from? I was gobsmacked and completely unprepared as to how to deal with it. I was naive. I was getting by on, I didn't know it was called relational practice, just being nice. You know, I was just like, oh no, this is going wrong. And so I had to have a sulky lesson. I had to just use my pedagogical toolkit of just sulking with them. There was no button to press, there was no flag to wave, there wasn't some deputy head who was going to come running in his brown brogues, telling me, taking all the kids away. It was just me and them, and I didn't know what to do, and I was ashamed because I didn't know what to do. And we'd had such a good time. I was almost saying to him, can we just do Kes again? Because it was nice then, wasn't it? Wasn't it nice when we did that? Now it's all gone wrong. And I went to see my head of department, who was a great lady, and I said, what can I do? And she said, find a book that can get your message across. So I went to the English stock cupboard, which was a rare old place. I don't know if we still have them in secondary schools, where it's like you've got to be Indiana Jones to explore one of those rooms. And you have to do a secret knock because the PE teacher and the physics teacher were having an affair. They're married now. Not to the same people. It's good. Yeah. But anyway, so I went in, found the book. I thought, this is the book. Why didn't I think of this? This is the book I must teach them. In fact, it's the best book ever written, as far as I'm concerned. I just love it so much. I'm going to teach them that. And I took the books home, cleaned them up, because over the years they've got dirty finger marks on, they've got not good drawings on the front and stuff like that. I'm doing my best with Tipp-Ex and stuff like that. And I went to see Lauren in the library, and she gave me some plastic wallets for these books, and I gave the books out, and the kids were thrilled because they were bottom set and they'd never had the clean books before. Do you know what I mean? It was just great. And it was To Kill a Mockingbird I was giving them. And they were like, what's this about? And I'm like, well, get ready, because it's mint, this book. It's my favourite. And what that was you're going to enjoy this a lot, because it's one of my favourites. And so I read it, we started reading it, and what we forget about To Kill a Mockingbird is the first chapter is quite dull. It's all about the birth of an imagined community around about Louisiana, a place like that. And I started reading it, and then I started hearing this banging going on at the front here, and I'm thinking, I'm tactically ignoring that, because by now I've been on a behaviour management course. Done it online, No, I haven't. And there's this bang. Eventually I look, and Troy is just banging his own head against the table. I said, Troy, what you doing? Why are you undermining me? And he's like, I'm not, sir. It's just boring. And that was, it's boring. But it came out like, it's boring now. And I'm like, all right, it's hard, right? It's hard. That's not the same. Just let me get through it. And he's like, oh. And he's chuntering. Oh, no. It's crap, that. So I start, carry on. And then he starts it again. And I said, pack it in, please. And he looks at me and he goes, do an accent. I says, what? And he went, do an accent. I said, an accent? And he says, yeah. And he did that self-satisfying, crack on, do an accent. And fortunately for him, he'd asked me, and I'm good at accents, because I grew up watching American TV. Anyone with me on this? The A-Team, Chips, the Dukes of Hazzard. Some of you don't know what I'm on about, do you? Tales of the Golden Monkey. You might not remember that one. One season. Yeah. So doing an American accent was a no-brainer. I didn't realise that this was going to be a behaviour management approach. I'm thinking of turning it into a pamphlet. I should do. And so I just then went into it. I actually nailed it down to the Louisiana. I'm not going to do it now for you. But I actually nailed it. And I didn't dare look at the kids. I just carried on reading. And then when I did, all these boys, all these hard boys, these tough boys. There's a boy at the back called Robert. He's been put in this class because there's no room for him anywhere else. He shouldn't be in this class. But he's there. But they're all just watching. Do you know when you read... Have you ever had that where you read to kids and they're just lapping it up, they're just drinking it up? That's what I had there, and I thought, where's the documentary film crew here? Just look at the stage. And we read the book. You'll know the story. There's going to be a spoiler now. What happened there was Atticus Finch, you know, the main character, well, one of the main characters, he's the adult hero. He loses the case and the innocent black man goes to prison where he will be murdered, and indeed is. And I wanted the kids to really feel the impact of that. Now, when we talk about creative conversation, the only person I was having a creative conversation with at that point was myself. And I'm thinking, what can I do to slug these kids, to really hammer this moment in the novel home? And I got one of the school chairs that the kids weren't sitting on, and I put it on a table, and I just put a post-it note on it. And on the post-it note I wrote, Atticus Finch has lost the case. And I wanted the kids to feel the impact of it. So there's just a chair with a post-it note, and I said, right, who's going to come up here and reassure Atticus Finch that he's done a good job, even though he's lost the case? Who's going to do it? Robert. Who's going to do it? Robert, come on. And Robert's just got his head down, he's refusing. It's like, fair dues. Who's going to get up? And who do you think got up? Yeah, Troy goes. And he does that thing that lads do, lads everywhere. They go, oh, I'll do it. I'll do it for you as a favour. And so he comes up, and I go to the back of the class. He comes up and he just says to the chair, and I'm going to give you the proper Barnsley now. He says, "Thou's done all right. Nobody could ask for more. You're a good man," he says to the chair. And I'm at the back like, Captain, my captain. I'm nearly standing on the chair myself, you know. It was just lovely. And he was proper pleased as punch. Now that was, we weren't talking then about creativity. We weren't talking about risk-taking. We weren't talking about anything like that. I was just trying to get on. I was just trying to keep going. The kids had come in and been horrible to each other and used racist language because they'd all watched a DVD that was getting passed around. It was Pulp Fiction. So I'm going back years, you know, but they were all just basically coming in Tarantino'd up. But I didn't know, I hadn't realised. I hadn't realised. But in that moment, and this is the point, I guess, is that in that moment the curriculum was of service to me and to the children in the room, and not the children in the room and me being of service to the curriculum. Does that make sense? I've no idea if I've answered any questions. It's a nice story.
No, but the whole point of cheering is I make it sound as if you have.
Okay.
That's pretty much how this deal works.
Okay.
Right? So I think lots in that. And one of the things that you do really well in that answer, and you do it really well in the book as well, is trying to get people off the hook of the binary task, you know, the task that's either right or wrong. And I think there's a real danger sometimes, particularly with a narrowing of the curriculum, emphasis on attainment, that we concentrate on that. And it doesn't allow children the space to confound our expectations of them in the way that Troy confounded yours. And I think there's something really powerful about the whole idea of botheredness, because if you don't have that openness, if you don't have that possibility of success, that possibility of a contribution, you're not going to get that. And I think some of the other things that are really interesting about that, Hywel, is that I didn't previously know that you were the prototype for what's now become 1+2 in Scottish schools. Well, loads of people teach a language that they don't speak, and sometimes two languages that they don't speak, because we've deemed that to be a timetabling efficiency as well. So and that's really interesting. Nor did we know that you were in fact played by Robin Williams in the film Dead Poets Society, so that's all good. But I think what you're clarifying here is the need to engage young people, the need to give them a sense of belonging, the need to root the curriculum in the life of the child. And interestingly, we need to think about how that applies in the sciences and history, geography, and all of these other examples as well. And we can come back to that. But you do that really well, and you talk there about the idea of using the curriculum to challenge. You know, to reassure on the one hand, to challenge on the other, and thinking about pedagogy in relation to that. And it's kind of made me wonder why you felt the world needed this book right now.
I think there's... let me think. I think there's... am I right standing up? Is that all right? Yeah, just... I think there's a need at the moment. I think that teaching has a risk. There is a risk that teaching has become so scientific, and that's a good thing, that we've got all our science of teaching. We're research informed. We understand, you know, the things that perhaps 20 years ago we didn't. We didn't have research informing our practice, and so I think that's really good. But my worry is the balance has tipped so much that. I want to sort of try and get it equal again, where it's also a bit of an art as well. There's a bit of an art to it, and I think that I can only speak for myself. I became a teacher because I wanted to be Robin Williams in Dead Poets Society, actually, because that's why I went to see that at the cinema, and I came out of the cinema and I said to my mate, Big Craig, I said, Craig, I know what I want to do with my life. I want to be, and it was like the lights changed in the car park, and I said, I want to be a teacher of literature in a 1950s American high school, you know. But yeah, and I think that it's almost like we need to make sure that teaching doesn't just become a scientific exercise, although I appreciate all that. I worry, and I don't know how much this is happening in Scotland, but in England, there seems to be a gentle movement towards a deprofessionalisation of what it is to teach. My brother, Big Al, right? My brother Alan, he works at T-Base Services. I don't know if you know, right? Southbound, he's the manager. He's an expert on cheese. And if you want to, you get 15% off if you mention it. That is not true. I've just made that up, right? But he's a good lad, my brother. He's got charisma. He's funny. He's crackers. He's great. And I think he doesn't want to be a teacher. You know, he went straight into working in retail when he was 16. But I think one day someone might give him a PowerPoint and some sheets and a script and put a cross where he's got to stand, and he'd be really good at engaging a room in watching something and then perhaps going through some sort of learning process. What I'm trying to say is my brother shouldn't be allowed to teach, right? You know, but he's brilliant at selling cheese, and we're the teachers, and I'm worried that there's a kind of, I don't know, maybe I'm just paranoid, but I think there's something somewhere that one day it'll be much cheaper. There'll be cheap teachers, and we're going to call them teachers, but there won't be you, and there won't be me. And I'm concerned about that, and that's botheredness sits there as well. Botheredness sits there in that fight to keep everything that's got us to where we are now, to having these conversations, you know, in the middle of the city in the evening about practice. All those things. That's what botheredness is as well. It's keeping hold of what it is to teach and being passionate about it and being a passionate defender of what it is to be a teacher as well.
Yeah, and I mean, a lot of these comments, I think, are really timely. I mean, mentioned the industrial action before,
Yeah.
but what's at the heart of the industrial action is to get recognition for the professional qualities of the teacher, and to do that, I think one of the things we need to do is commit to that. And again, just supporting the point that you're making, Hywel, I was working last week in a secondary school in Hull, and they were struggling to choose between which model of behaviour management they were going to use. And it was a bit like, well, we've tried Tom Bennett and now we're trying Paul Dix, and sometimes we try Paul Dix and then we try, and it was just that kind of conversation around the different models. And I was coming back to them saying the real skill in behaviour management and in teaching generally is the ability to dance. It's the ability to respond, it's the ability to move, to change your stance, it's all of that. And that only comes from a professionalism that goes beyond training. And I think one of the brilliant things about Botheredness is that you write about the whole teacher. I'm going to come back to that. You write about the whole teacher. It's about experience. There's lots of references to research. There's lots of academia. I mean, I think one of the brilliant reviews of the book, which I hope you don't mind me quoting from.
Is it yours?
It is, yeah. It's my review of the book. It's a remarkable book. It's a brilliant combination of academia, anecdote, of evidence and experience, and is studied with cultural references. And I think that whole idea about trying to bring the whole person, if you like, into teaching, I think is a real strength in it. Is that something you'd agree with?
Very much so, and I think what lies in there as well is passion. And I asked in the book as well. I asked a load of teachers. There were new teachers to the profession, so they're all coming in. It's September, the first week of their teacher training. You remember that? And you're going in, and then someone asks you, "What do you want it to be like to be taught by you?" And I'm asking that, and they have to write it down. What do you want it to be like? And I'm serious with it. I'm not having any gags. What do you want it to be like? And interestingly, their responses are all the responses that we could cynically look at and go, well, try getting in a classroom with my class. Or, we can look, they want to change the world. They want to help. They want to show a passion for their subject. They want to demonstrate what it's like to be, that learning is just a brilliant thing, and all that. I've got all these quotes, they're in the book. And I showed it I've showed the slides to some teachers, and people go, oh yeah, God, I remember being like that. And then when we have an interview though, it's true, isn't it? When we'd have an interview, that's what we want to hear. We want to hear that passion. We want to hear that desire to make a difference. And yet, certainly in some schools, not all, but in some schools I visit, I sometimes get gigs, I think you get the same, I get asked to go and speak to staff who are just, can you come and talk to my staff? They're a bit sad. And it's like, what's happened? They're just teachers and they just need cheering up. And it's not a good way to make a living. I'd rather that we could just hang on to the passion bit, if possible. I'm going to see I've got a PGCE crew at Huddersfield Uni. I've not seen them now for about 4 months. I think I'm going to see them in a couple of weeks, and I know it's going to be like the opening of Saving Private Ryan. I think they're nearly at the end of their tether. I'm getting all the messages through. One of them, Adam, got in touch with me just thinking about the behaviour thing, and he just said, Hywel, have you got an A4 sheet about behaviour? Because you don't want to read much, and it's just an A4 sheet, something succinct. Just an A4 sheet, and I'm like, I can get you a sheet, I'll make you one. But better still, you go and deal with the classes you've got, And I think the other thing is, my book's full of, it's actually, it's got lots of references to like music and films, and actually, there's, and I don't want to put you off it, it's the last thing I want to do, they're really heavy. There's a lot of stuff about just what it's like being in a classroom, and we've all got stories. I'm fortunate because I get asked to speak them out loud, but you've got better stories than I've got. We've all got stories about teaching, and I think sharing those stories like we can on an event like this is dead important. Wearing one's professional hat on on the sleeve is a good thing, I think. And I'm not scoffing at those teachers when they're writing that list. I'm thinking, we need you, and we need to somehow find a way of keeping that spirit that got us into teaching in the first place. Keeping that going, keeping that alive.
You're very good always, but you're good in the book as well, around humility, I think. And before we started the conversation, Hywel and I were reminiscing about a bit of work we did, and we were working with some kids in Craigmillar, and the first time we went in to work with them, Hywel was teaching them, and I was supposed to be observing. And he was sitting in an adjustable chair, and he'd got the kids all gathered round him. And one of these wee kids was working the lever on the chair. So it was like watching a Jack in the Box. Right? So Hywel's bobbing up and down, and this wee kid climbs on his back and whispers in his ear, and he's going, "Do you like babies? Have you got any babies?" And I mean, he's the best practitioner I've ever worked with. 4 minutes before I'm making my intervention, I'm lifting this kid off his back and taking him out. And the point I'm trying to get to is there's something really powerful about sharing the stories where we got it wrong.
Yeah.
And you'll do that relatively often. You'll talk about things that didn't turn out the way you expected them to. And I think because of the levels of accountability, we're too easily defeated by a mistake that should be nowhere near fatal. Or an incident, I mean, I've been telling this story a million times, but we had a reunion of all the teachers in the school that I started teaching in. And the guy who'd been the head of German when I started approached me, and he said, "God, I remember you so well." And I thought, this is going well. And then he said, "You were appalling." He said, and the thing that was remarkable about you was everything about you was appalling. I mean, the way you looked was appalling, the way you dressed was appalling, the way you spoke was appalling. And apparently he'd gone to the head teacher, or rector, as we called them at that time, to complain that he'd appointed me. And he went in and said, "You know, what on earth did you think you're doing?" And the head teacher apparently said to him, "Be under no illusion, Mr. Muir. That young man has a field marshal's baton in his rucksack, which is more than can be said for you." And he just wagged his finger, and the head of German disappeared. And then waited 30 years to tell me I'd been appalling, which I thought was interesting. But he couldn't get over the fact that I was pretty crap. You know, I'll be honest with you, I was pretty crap, and I was also an outlier in the school, which is hopeless. You know, if you're the only person that's trying to make Stone Age bread in the history class with actual stones, and everybody else in the school is using a blackboard, you don't really tend to have much impact other than kind of, you know, a farcical element in the school curriculum. But he was just amazed that I'd managed to recover from that, and I got through it. And I don't think we allow ourselves that sense, you know, of overcoming mistakes, like you teaching German.
Like me teaching, and also what I should say about that word botheredness, I just put it, I'd seen it, I'd worked in my secondary, and then I went to work in this special school, and my job was, because they'd got a Kaplunk curriculum, whereby all kids were loved and looked after, but they didn't learn anything. You know, they were just proper looked after and nurtured, and played Kaplunk a lot, and Monopoly and pool. But they needed a curriculum, they needed a reasonable curriculum. And something I saw all the time there was these teachers just proper looking out for these kids, but they just needed to they needed to get a balance up. But I described that, I wrote a book called Oops 10 years ago, and I called it Botheredness. I said what those teachers have got is botheredness, and it's taken me this long to sort of like try and think, right, what is it though, what is that? And I did, when I was doing some research, I found this stuff from this researcher called Judith Kleinfeld in 1972. Do you mind, can I just tell everyone?
Sure, of course, yeah.
And it's in the book.
I'm just your warm-up.
All right, it just cracked me right up, because I just looked at it and I thought, well, this is it. This is it. What you've got is there's 4 types of teacher. This is 50-year-old research, by the way, so don't be offended, right? There's 4 types of teacher, and what we want is the teacher who's got high expectations and high relational approaches. So you've got the teacher who's what she called a traditionalist, but please don't put that on Twitter because it just kicks off, right? But she called this person, and this person is someone who's got incredibly high expectations, but is low relational. So the teacher says, stop crying, just get it done. Right? Stop crying, get it done. It'll stop bleeding in a minute, just get it done and do it well. So you got the sort of traditionalist, she calls that teacher. And then she's got this lovely teacher, and this is what I saw in the special school in the pupil referral unit. She's got the sentimentalists, and they are just, come on, don't you worry about that horrible, nasty work that you've got to do, that nasty learning. You come over here and have a sit down and we'll have a cake, you know. And that's high relational and high relationship, I should say, and low expectation. And then my absolute favourite is the sophisticate who says this: I've already got a degree. So if you don't want to do it, don't do it. I do not care. All right? I'm not bothered. You do it. If don't do it, do it. Not bothered. Not bothered. I know you're only 5. You know, you need to look at me as an example. That's low. You get the drift, don't you? Low expectation, low relationship. And what Kleinfeld argued for and talked about was the warm demander. I'd finished writing the book and I'd sent it to publishers, and then I found this work and I had to recall it and said, I've got to write about this. The warm demander, I love it. Because I talk about the stuff that I do. I talk about stories and people, place and problem and purpose, you know, and all that. I share all that stuff, and yet at the heart of it is I want kids to meet the challenge. I want them to excel it. So I am a demanding adult, but I want to be warm with it. What we had, and I don't know if it's in Scotland particularly, but in England, there's some schools label themselves as warm strict. Don't know if you, and they go around measuring girls' skirts. Look at the BBC News, right? It's weird. Warm demander is high expectation, high relationship, and I just think when I got that in my head, I thought, right, I've been all of them, and I'm all right with that. I've been all those people, but what I'm aspiring to be still, even yesterday with PJ, I've still been that warm demander. I want to try and be that warm demander.
Yeah, and again, it's an important conversation to have, because I think it kind of puts the question back to people: how do I do that when I've got content to get through and exams to get through? And you know, one of the things that we've talked about a lot in these conversations in the past is how easy it is to get trapped in the cycle of just trying to get kids over the hurdle that's in front of them. You know, so if I can just get them through this test, if I can just get them this qualification, and I've talked about it a lot in my own experience, that kids that I got through hires in Scotland often didn't do very well at university because I'd done too much to push them, hothouse them, and all I was really doing was equipping them for subsequent failure. And that idea of being the warm demander, that you're constantly looking to place that challenge, to be ambitious for children and what they do in a wider sense, and how you think about that's hugely important. But I'm really interested, Hywel, you've touched on it a number of times, and I've already touched on it, but I mean, this is absolutely a remarkable book in that it's got research in it, it's got anecdotes in it, it's got lots of accounts of your experience, it's got lots of arguments for particular positions, it's got research that you didn't even know about when you started writing the book, and then it's got stuff about films and about books and about TV programmes. There's more cultural references in it than you can shake a stick at. So how in God's name did you persuade any publisher to take this on? How did you persuade anybody to get this out as a book?
I was surprised as much as you were, David. I think what part of the, and we've already alluded to this, about this idea of having a passion and actually as a teacher being a person and not being a robot, not being AI, because that's the next thing, isn't it? Get ready. You know, we're going to have to fight our corner on this. So I suppose what I've tried to model in the book is I'm passionate about cinema. You can see the influence of Jaws, the film. I like Jaws. It's an important film in my life, but not because of the plot, not because necessarily of the performances, but because of how I was 5 when I went to see it, and I just held my dad's hand all the way through it, and he held mine as well and gripped it at certain points, especially when the head falls through the. I don't know if you know what I'm on about, but the Jaws for me was like a real. That was like my first memory of being at the cinema. And I slept again when I was 9. Watched it again on the television. It was broadcast in October 1981, and I watched it. I'm quite obsessed. And I watched it again then, and I realised it had a plot, and it wasn't just scary. It had a story. And then I was interested in. That really started me being really interested in films. And then I was interested in music, I was interested in two-tone and the specials and madness and all these things. And I put them all in the book because that's mine. What's yours? What's your thing? This is mine. This is me modelling my stuff. And also, I couldn't help it. When I was a full-time teacher, this stuff would bleed into the work I do, into the conversations I'd have with kids. I'm not into football, really. But as a teacher, I knew it was a good behaviour management tool to know what I was on about. So I just told kids I was the Barnsley FC mascot. Toby Tyke he's called. He runs up and down and I just told all the kids who I found a bit challenging. I said, that's me, that. Used to be an hairdresser, but he had to pack it in because of his ankles, so I do it now. I just made some up, you know. And we just find our way. And all, to me, talking about films, talking about music, it's talking about what happens in the world, you know. You could write a book just about the news, you know, and how the news influences curriculum. Because I am always looking at the news and thinking about how it can influence my curriculum. And I want to give an example of that before we finish, if that's all right.
Yeah, go on then.
All right, okay. I just thought because we've had to just sit and listen. I'm really grateful for you turning up tonight to come and listen.
We're not winding up yet. We're going
I'm not winding up. I'm just saying thank you for listening to that. But I just wondered if you could just join in with me with something. No, is that all right? It's nothing weird. All right? Nothing weird. It's not. We're not going to do.
But here's a warm demander.
Yeah. I think we'll be really good at this. Let's say we're going in a right. Do you know here? Look. Let's say there's the side of a hill here, and the council have just ripped away a load of trees, lots of shrubbery, and what has been revealed to us is a cave, a deep, deep cave. We don't know how deep yet, but there it is. It is felt amongst the experts at Town Hall that no one has been in there for a very, very long time. So we've been asked to go in. So with the people around you now, and if you're sitting between two people, just pick your favourite, you know, just whoever you want to talk to. But talk to someone, all right, if there's someone sitting behind you on their own, just have a chat with them. Can you just, if we're going to go and explore the cave, can you just decide what we need to take in with us to make sure that we're going to be safe? You just do that. Just tell each other. Make the list. I've got a funny slide. Not a funny story. You've not heard. This is ace. Oh, this is so funny.
You know what I want? Somebody.
Yeah, I'll do it next time. Okay, is this all right? Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you very much. Thanks for doing it. Some of you were really enjoying that. Could you, now we've got our, I'm hoping you were talking about things like tools and objects and things to keep us safe. The next thing I just want you to think about though is, and this might be a bit harder, I don't know, but what sort of attitudes are we taking into the cave? What sort of people do we need to be to go and explore the cave? What do we need to be good at? Have a chat about that. Bit harder, that one. This kid here, check him out. It's just out of news. Is that what you're talking about being agile? Thanks. Thank you very much. Thanks. So, that we're people in a place. We haven't got a problem or a dilemma necessarily. We've just got to sort this out. So we're just sorting it out to make sure we know what we're taking in. Now, this is what I was doing with this class in Burnley. Have you been watching Happy Valley? Right. That neck of the woods. So this is me. Now I'm doing this with the kids. Can you see me drawing of the cave? When I use drawing more and more now, and it's just so kids have got something else to look at. And I always say to kids, even the older kids, I'll say, "Can you be nice about me drawing now? Because I'm not very good at it." And kids will always go, "Oh, actually, no, you are." If ever you need to feel good, just sketch something and tell them that. So can you see the cave? Now I am in that photograph. I'm tactically ignoring that boy because he's just got up. No one's asked him to, and he's just sat next to me. And I'm like, you can see, I don't know if you might not be able to tell, but that face that I've got on there is, I'm not sure what's going on. And I don't know who to go to for help. But I'm just going to carry on talking like this, and I'm just not going to pay him any attention, because that's what he wants, and all that. So I say to the kids, and the kids have just done what you've just done. So I say, right, what are we taking in? What are we taking in? And the kid said, I think we should take in a GPS. And I said, that is fantastic, a GPS. And this boy next to me, he's called Jack. This boy next to me does this. It won't work down there. Right, and I just think, right, okay, I'm just going to leave that. Okay, yeah, GPS. Yeah, if you want to say something, say it to everyone. GPS, that's good. What else are we taking in? A head torch, that's good. And he says, yeah, it's reasonable. I'm not kidding, I'm like, who is this kid? What attitudes do we need? What skills do we need? And this little girl says, we need to be brave. Yeah, you don't want to be a chicken. And so he's really getting on my nerves now, to be honest, with his useful comments. And then finally there's this lovely little lad at the front who's proper beaming. You know, have you got him in your head? He's like proper beaming. He's like, and I went, go on then. He went, you need to be good at swimming. And I went, that is fantastic. And he said, that is the last thing that you want to do. If you see a body of water, is start swimming in it. And I lost my rag. I didn't. I just went, who are you? Who are you? And he said, I'm Jack. I said, right, that's good, but who are you? How come you know all? And he said, I go caving with my dad every Saturday. I went, all right, thanks. Could have done me knowing that. Jack, that's Jack, that. School refuser. School refuser, Jack. Jack, who I was told, watch him. Because he might not stay in, and you know what I mean? And actually, just in this moment, he's absolutely in it, and I need his help.
Because I thought the GPS would work. I didn't know that. He's like, no, you don't want GPS. I asked him about it. He's like giving me all the tips. He says to me, yeah, you need to let someone know. You need to put it on the website that you go in the cave. And he's giving me all this info. And I'll be honest with you, do you know what? I think I'd been struck by a little bit, just a little bit, and it's not malicious, but a little bit of unconscious prejudice. I just thought, there's a rough kid there, and he's bringing nothing. And actually he brought everything. And the thing, and I mentioned the news a minute ago, and I've just got a couple of these little pictures here. What we found deep in the cave, I'm just finishing the story off, because this is what we did. We found cave paintings. But what we realised the cave paintings were doing, and this was taught and shown, it wasn't just, we weren't just all playing, it was shown and taught, that the evidence now is there's the scientists have connected the cave paintings with the shapes of the stars and where the positions of stars in the sky, so that there is evidence that suggests that some of the cave paintings are actually maps of the heavens. And when I read that on my phone and researched it on Google, I thought, we've got to tell the kids, because otherwise they won't make that connection, and it's important that we do. And the thing that was happening in the news, and this will place this a few weeks ago when it happened, there was a comet passing over Earth. Did you hear about it? And the last time it had passed over was 50,000 years ago, when I was a new teacher. 50,000 years ago. And so the kids went on then to think about what it was like to be Neanderthal, looking up at the heavens and watching that comet go overhead. Now, I think there's some nice stuff there, and there's some stuff there that actually meets the needs of the curriculum, because if you want to know, the curriculum project is the solar system, but we're going via a cave. These are some of the things that we did. We are trying to make sense of the night sky. There was a girl called Ashley, and she'd just written this philosophical article about, it's basically a monologue about I am nothing as I sit here at the cave mouth, looking up at that. It was just wonderful. Do you know what I mean? It was absolutely wonderful. And that was the comment. I just wanted to make that link that teaching is organic. Teaching can be. We always have a curriculum we've got to deliver, the published curriculum. It's frozen, it's dead, it's on a website. The curriculum we're interested in, which is why we might turn up to an event like this, is what's happening in class and the lived curriculum. So,
And again, there's a really useful platform there, because, you know, what are the qualities you need to tackle some of the big mathematical challenges and issues? You know, what are the qualities you need to be a scientist, to look for discovery? There are so many starters, I think, just included in that kind of conversation. And I think what comes through a lot, Hywel, is for us to think about the possibilities that we have through teaching and through learning and through the curriculum, and a responsibility to exploit them. And one of the other things that Hywel and I have been talking about today is I'm about to do a bit of work for a Holocaust trust, which is also related to a school. Hywel's already done work with them. And the whole conversation around that is how do we contribute to that whole need to avoid the worst of which humanity is capable? You know, I was saying yesterday that we've atrophied horror around the Holocaust, which happened, you know, in the last century, and we've had so many Holocausts since, latterly in Syria, we're seeing it in Ukraine. You know, it is not something from the past that we need to commemorate. It's an ever-present danger. And in a sense, how do we work together to try and create what you've referred to in other contexts, along with Deborah Kidd, as a curriculum of hope? And the book that you did with Deborah is Uncharted Territories. You know, again, that whole idea of opening up learning and looking at what we can achieve through the totality of the experience that we offer. And that includes through support agencies and organisations with which we might partner. I'm going to just give people a quick opportunity now before we do finish. If there's anything anyone else wants to ask about or come in with before we round off. That's fine. That's fine. Clearly, we've got you bothered. I am bothered, but I'm not bothered enough to ask you. Yeah, go on then. Fire away.
I'll be that one who will, just to make you happy.
Promises.
I really, you said something early on that really struck me, and that was, where have I written this? Oh yes, a lack of ambition. I actually did my PGCE in Leeds, so not far away, and I went to South Humberside, as it was, Grimsby, just at the time when the fishing fleet went down to almost nothing. And I was trying to teach physics to the low set, who had no interest at all, because there was no work for them. They were all expected to go on the boats. There was no work. And then someone told me if they want their captain's ticket or their mate's ticket, they need physics. And so I would just add a few things in about fishing and about navigation and remind them that if this is what they wanted to do, they needed a physics qualification. And this first class I did it with, I was actually sitting on a park bench in Grimsby, not the most exciting place to be sitting, and this young man came up and sat next to me and said, "Miss, I got my ticket because you got me my physics." And so it's finding that little spark of ambition helped me in that situation where there was almost no ambition.
Yeah, and I think it's, and that goes right back to where we started with what's botheredness about. It's about finding the context and finding the. We know what we've got to teach the children. We might have to teach them to analyse a poem. They've got to be able to sit in an exam and analyse a poem. What we need to do is probably also get quite absorbed in poetry and the beauty of poetry in order to then start dismantling it. I think it's the hook, or no pun intended, the hook is still a thing. It's not a fad. Hooking kids in isn't a fad. Hooking kids in is getting their attention. When we've got their attention, we might be able to get their interest. When we've got them interested, we might be able to get them engaged. When we've got them engaged, we might be able to get them invested. And that engagement to investment probably is where the botheredness rests.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good summary. And anyone else just want to come in just before we close it down?
Just before we do close it down, most people in the room are probably teachers, but I think everybody in the room, if not a teacher, is really interested in what you're saying. And you talked a lot about passion, and I manage the lifelong learning wide achievement service, so they're not people who are necessarily in the classroom, but they're strong partners around botheredness. Because I think one of the things I've been saying to the service is find your passion. Find your passion as an educator, whether that's in or out of school, but also help young people find their passion. So we've got to somehow, and I think what you're talking about as well is making sure there's no poverty of opportunity, whether that's in the school or out of the school. So I'm just interested in the teacher and the partner, if you've got anything to say about that.
I have, and you mentioned poverty, and something that I talk about in the book, it's, if you like, from a research point of view. Martin Haberman was an American educationalist, and he talked a lot about pedagogies of poverty, which is not anything to do with money, but about experience or access to, if you like, the world. He went to places like Detroit, where the businesses and the industries had collapsed, the kind of place where you find Louis Theroux, if that means, you know what I mean? These places where there's been a collapse. And what he found in the schools is that the schools were full of good people, but that they were reflecting back the lack of aspiration and hope. They were saying to kids, if you work hard, you can get out. If you work hard, you can get away. And we don't want that. We want, you know, I know our message in Barnsley became, you know, go and see the world, but will you come back? Can you come back? We'll show you the world as well, because you're already streetwise. We want to help you be world-wise. In terms of partnerships, it's funny because, you know, obviously I'm talking about my book, and you know, and I'm a teacher. That's all I've ever done. I've worked behind a bar. I've worked in pit orchestras. I was a grave digger, but I don't want to talk about that. I was,
due to a timetable.
Yeah, it was due to a timetable. We should rehearse that. That's a good gag. Yeah, and so I only know really, and I feel comfortable talking about education. But then my cousin came to me, and he works in cakes. So I've got my brother in cheese, my cousin in cakes, and he said none of our staff are bothered. And I've seen you been banging on about this. Is this about what's this? What will this mean for us? And I said, well, I don't know. And it really made me think. And I think it is about that. It's about having pride and having, you know, in what you do, and how we communicate that to other adults. I don't know. It's an interesting challenge. But I think one thing we can do is model it, which I suppose is what we're trying to do up here, and you're doing it by being here. You know, we're modelling it to each other.
And the book, Botheredness, is available at the back of the room. If you buy it from Hywel tonight, you'll get it for 15 quid. Admittedly more than it's worth, but still £10 less than it would cost you under other circumstances. So, you know, not to argue with it. And I've promised them that we'll buy copies that are left over, so, you know, you'll either pay for it directly or through your council tax. The choice is pretty much how this works. And Hywel will sign your book for you with any name you like.
The value goes down, unfortunately.
Yeah. He's happy to sign Brad Pitt, whatever you name it. Our next creative conversation will be on the 25th of May, and it will be a different kind of conversation. We've got Anne Bamford, who is a real expert in creativity, and it'll be much more of a kind of workshopy conversation, if you like. She did a brilliant session for the Creative Learning Network people, I think over a year ago, which I think went down really well, and we're really pleased that we've managed to get her. And then we're hoping to round off with the year on the 3rd of June, which is a Friday, which will be around inspirational teachers, and we're trying to get a couple of really interesting people, authors and people who've been inspired by teachers, whose lives have been changed by teachers. And one of the brilliant things about the book, Hywel, which we didn't talk about, is that there are lots of reviews in it, and some of them are from former pupils of Hywel's, rather than Shirley and Somerville, obviously, former people of mine. But, you know, and I think that's what we're looking for. We're looking for what you described. We're looking for that sense of people for whom the learning's meaningful. 5 years on, 10 years on, 20 years on, where there's an impact and where there's a real change. And if you're going to get that impact from anyone, I suspect you'll get it from Hywel. It's always a privilege to listen to him. It's always a privilege to work with him. And the sheer joy that he brings, that sheer sense of humanity. And what he always does for me, and I hope he's done it for other people, is he just inspires that sense of possibility, that you can make that relationship, you can find that space, you can demonstrate that care, but there's got to be a point and there's got to be a purpose, and the purpose has got to be that we make a difference. And so for that, Hywel, a massive thank you.
Thank you.
And books at the back of him, wine! Yes. Right, and you get extra wine if you actually buy a book.
Yeah, get free glass.
Okay, thanks for coming.